Now, unless you've been living under a rock for the past few weeks, you'll be aware now that Reading and Leeds have published their initial lineup for 2023. And it's safe to say it's a bit of a stinker, lads. So as I do every year, I've taken it upon myself to compile a list of 15 names to add to the lineup to maybe like bring it up to scratch. So firstly, I want to acknowledge like the major issue I've been having with picking these names, because I think it's also one of the biggest issues with the festival as a whole at the minute, and that's the lack of experience and the lack of big names in sub-headline slots. In the past, before we had two main stages, you get like a really insane headliner and then 2 or 3 really big, really decent sub-headliners. However, now with the second main stage, has become like an added pressure to find 6 headliners. And that means that for a lot of acts that really should be in headline slots, they're now dragged into like the headliners conversation. For instance, Liam Gallagher sub-headlined in 2017. Like, that's the level of slot we're talking about here. Royal Blood sub-headlined in 2019. But what happens is now, because all you sub-headliners are in the conversation for headline slots, it means that there's no one really left of the right standard and right pedigree that put on a good enough show to fill the sub-headline slots. And that's now led to them pulling in like newly formed acts with barely any music or any experience to fill those sub-headline slots. And it really, if anything, those should be the sets where things are really getting bigger and lead into like a grand finale. The point is that this issue makes the job of saving the festival really hard, because they've already announced all their subs, which means that anyone that gets added from now on most likely has to be smaller than those subs, and trying to save the festival while adding 0 big names is a pretty hard task to pull off. But this is who I've picked. So for the Friday, which is looking like kind of the alternative day, the first act I want to add is King Krule. Now, I'm not sure how active King Krule is. Currently, I believe his last album was 2020, which is fairly recent, but I don't know what's happened since. I love what I've heard from King Krule. It's very much seen as like male manipulator music, so it's kind of got to be a bit of a guilty pleasure. But I genuinely really like the vibe of his music, especially 6 Feet Beneath the Moon. It's just a really pleasant album to listen to, and Out Getting Ribs especially is my favourite song of all time. As like a music guy, I shouldn't really have a favourite song of all time. This song is just so good that I can't help but claim it as like my favourite ever. He also really just fits the vibe of the day, with Declan McKenna, Steve Lacy and the Snuts also being featured. My second act for the Friday was an act that I didn't really know much about until I saw him live, and that's Alfie Templeman. I was under the impression that he was just kind of like a Declan McKenna regen, but it turns out he's actually really decent, much more rocky than I expected. And while yeah, he is very similar to Declan McKenna, he has some really good like vibey songs, similar to a lot of that really groovy like Australian indie stuff, you know, like Tame Impala, Parcel, that kind of stuff. I've been really enjoying that stuff at the minute, so Alfie Templeman fits right in with that. I'd love to see him. An act I think could do a really good daytime set is Fetty Wap. With Billie Eilish and Steve Lacy on that day, it's pretty safe to say that Friday's going to be like the TikTok day, and Fetty Wap's newest song is like having this huge run on TikTok at the minute. It's giving him a real resurgence. I didn't even realize he was still making music, and I thought that he got left in like 2015 and that we'd moved on from Fetty Wap, but he's still releasing music apparently. And I can't even lie, those 2015 Fetty Wap tunes were actually kind of bangers, and I'd love to see him live. He also just kind of fits the vibe of Reading and Leeds, and I've said this to a few people, and people seem to kind of agree. He just fits that really good Reading and Leeds day slot type of vibe. Another band having a real spotlight at the minute are Fontaines DC. I think they'd fit in really well anywhere on this lineup, to be fair, so I've put them in here just because it kind of works out better for the other days and the other picks. The only issue with picking Fontaines is they're probably too big to be announced now, but we don't yet have a special guest slot on the lineup, and I reckon Fontaines are like a good size to fill that kind of slot. I think it really gas people up as well for the Friday, in my opinion. It feels like Friday, in my opinion, is the weakest day, so I feel like if you put Fontaines on, I feel like a lot more people would be excited about it, and it'd be kind of it'd be one of those bands that you put on to warm people up to the lineup a bit. But my last act to add to that Friday is Sundara Karma. We know these guys have an album coming out this year. It's been way too long since their last. I actually saw them live, Neighbourhood Festival in Manchester, and they were really, really good. Their most recent 2 projects, which are like EPs, not really for me, and I think they were a bad change of direction personally, but their full-length albums are genuinely both really fucking good. They're phenomenal albums, so hopefully like a new full-length from them would be a good return to form, and it'll cut out a lot of that weird kind of over experimentation that they've been getting into. Saturday is basically the indie day. All you need to do is look at the headliners, and then as well as that, them being joined by Loyal Counter and Wet Leg kind of means you can really delve into the different sides of the indie spectrum, if that's a thing that you want to call it. You can delve into like post-punk with this lineup, math rock, bit of shoegaze, more modern styles of R&B and garage. It's going to be a lot of fun is that day, I think. But first, that's probably like my favourite post-punk act right now, Shame. They're putting out a new album very, very soon, and the singles so far have been stunning. I'm really excited about them at the moment, and they were the best act of the weekend at Truck 2022, so I'd kill for them. Just to even play a tent at Leeds and Reading this year, I'd definitely be there. I'd probably see them over a lot of people that I want to see. My next act's slightly bigger. I've gone with Block Party, who are having a bit of a comeback currently, as them and Foes are the bands set to support Paramore on the UK and US tours this year. These guys were one of the first bands to really co-sign Foes. That would be a nice full circle moment to have them join Foes on the bill that day. And also, what I've heard of Block Party is really, really good. So I think that, and I think they'd slightly alter kind of the vibe of that day in the same way Wolf Alice did, in terms of like making it not just like kind of shit indie, make it a bit cool and a bit different. Next up, I've got Wonder Horse, who released a stellar debut album in 2022. They also supported Foes a few times. I saw them supporting Foes. I don't know how much they did, but I saw them doing it. And they supported Fontaine's DC on their tour at the end of the year. They're really different from anything else at the minute, and they almost bring like Ford truck car into a post-punk scenario, which is a mix that definitely shouldn't work, but somehow they've managed to make it work. I think an important thing to mention on this lineup is the lack of female artists. Jack Webb did a really good video explaining everything. He did it more justice than I ever could, and I'll link that below. But it's just kind of annoying that in a year where we have the return of Paramore and artists like Olivia Rodrigo, Bieber Doobie, Wolf Alice, Taylor Swift, etc. are popping off, it's weird that we only have one female headliner, and barely any females in the other spots either. I think a really good female act who suits the vibe of the day, and Reading and Leeds in particular, is Georgia Smith. I'm honestly surprised she's not done Reading and Leeds more, because she seems like a really natural pick. She's another act I'm not too familiar with, but from what I've heard, I really like her stuff. She's done tracks for the Black Panther soundtrack. She's got a few other tracks here and there. Yeah, I think everything I've heard of is quality. Last act is one for the kind of Ed Sheeran, Capital Radio, NPC kids. I've got Maisie Peters. I'm not saying she's an NPC. The music's actually pretty good, and it does sound really decent. It's just the places that I kind of see her performing a very NPC, passive music listener gigs. Stuff like Capital, Summertime Ball, and supporting Ed Sheeran on tour. But I do think she deserves way more than that, and I'd root for her, and I'd definitely welcome her to Reading and Leeds like daytime main stage slot. I think she could do really good, similar to something like Mabel, one of those kind of acts. Lastly, on the Sunday, it's looking like a general kind of pop and big hits day. I think Ava Max would be a really good shout for that. She's a really strange act, right? Because the chances are you'll have heard her music, but no one really seems to know anything about her, and a lot of people just aren't even aware of the name or who she is. Like, they'll have heard Sweet But Psycho. They wouldn't know who sings it if you asked them. Like I said though, she does have some big hits. Sweet But Psycho, Kings and Queens. It's kind of odd how much she's not in the spotlight. She's being labelled as like a Lady Gaga regen and an industry plant, and all these things that, to be honest, I kind of agree with, but I do actually think her music's pretty well made, and it's enjoyable to listen to. I have a bit of fun with her music. Her main flaws are like her writing, and especially her marketing, since no one knows who she is. Those are like her big flaws. But for the NPC crowd that don't really care, and for the NPC crowd that know Kings and Queens and Sweet But Psycho, which are like huge songs, they're like hundreds of millions of streams, those songs, I think she'd be welcome, and I think she'd probably gather a really decent crowd, similar to like Becky Hill did in 2021, where no one expected it at all. Next up are Pale Waves, who've had a really good 2022. They released one of the best albums of the year, and hopefully if they stay on that trajectory, they'll become like huge, because they've kind of really come into their own as a band now. They've got this opportunity now to really become a heavyweight, similar to how Wolf Alice have. More than anything, I'd really like to just see them again. Now for a band that in any other circumstance I would not bring up, but with the state of the current lineup, they'd just be a good addition to get another decent guitar act in, and that's Sports Team. I have a strange relationship with Sports Team, in that they became a band that never blew me away, but I always rooted for them and enjoyed their stuff. All the times I've seen them, they've been great live. Their most recent album wasn't it. Me and the boys troll this new Sports Team album endlessly because it's just so fucking goofy. It's just kind of, like I said, goofy and forgettable. It wasn't even bad. It just didn't have anything at all. that stood out, and it just kind of made me fall out of love with them. However, because of like the repeated proof I've seen that they are good live, I do think they'd be a welcome addition here. Now, each day has a pretty good emo slash hardcore name, with you've got Don Broco on the Friday, you've got Yumi at 6 on the Saturday, and Nothing But Thieves on the Sunday, all spread out across the weekend. So this next band could have really been on any day. They're here to bring like a bit extra to the Nothing But Thieves day, because like they're the band of those three that I'm least familiar with. That's literally the only reason I've placed them there. I've picked them specifically because I liked a lot of their earlier stuff, and I think Lynn Gunn's a great vocalist. I've never seen them live, and I think they'd be really good to see. They're kind of similar to what Pale Waves are doing at the minute as well, so if we got both, they'd bring like a different dynamic to that day, and the crossover of like styles and vibes would work really well. Lastly are one of my favourite bands on this list, Parcels, they're like an Australian groove rock band, like I mentioned earlier on with like Tame Impala, Alfie Templeman sort of bands. These guys were co-signed like early on by Daft Punk. You can really tell when you hear their music. Like I played the boys some Parcels the other day, and they were like, yeah, you can tell they were signed by Daft Punk. They sound similar to Tame Impala and like the recent Arctic Monkeys album. Like when that Arctic Monkeys album dropped, I remember being like, this sounds like Parcels, and everyone was like, what the fuck are you on about? And I was like, Parcels are really good guys, so I think people would really like them if they delved in. I saw Parcels at work one night, not knowing who they were or hearing any of their music, and I came out of that shift having seen one of the best live gigs I've ever witnessed. They were so good, and I've fallen in love with them after hearing that. So that's my 15 names to add. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of these picks, and let me know who you'd like to see added to the lineup. Also, just to let you know, production has started on the new podcast series. I'm aiming to release it like week by week around March, April time, but I'll keep you updated whenever I have more news. But yeah, that's all for now from me. I'll see you very soon.